Bill Renaissance Podcast with Matt Folger and Evan Spadoni. This week we cover the European Union's negative interest rates and the ECB, Shields and Brooks, Dave Bratt's upset against Eric Cantor and his plan to cut Social Security by 2/3, Iraq, and Tomas Piketty and Elizabeth Warren. So we talked about the euro falling against the negative interest rates that have been imposed in the European Union. Now, a week later, the euro fell by 0.7% against the dollar over 2 days as markets reacted to measures unveiled by the European Central Bank on June 5th. The ECB set a deposit rate of minus 0.1%, making it the first big central bank to introduce negative interest rates, by which it hopes to spur banks to lend rather than hoard money. It also cut its main refinancing rate to 0.15% from 0.25% and took action to provide banks with cheaper loans. Oh, that'll help.
More the same.
The measures are aimed at tackling worryingly low inflation in the Eurozone, which stood at a mere 0.5% in May. As we said, the exchange rates are dipping like before. It's a hot potato currency. So if you're going to hold money on deposit there, you're losing money. So why would you do that? So the insanity of the QE model, which Japan, the EU,
Japan's
Britain,
taxes on corporate wealth now is another way to try to get some stimulus going in their economy.
Cutting taxes on corporate wealth. Oh, nice. Yeah, of course. More to the rich. More to the rich. It's never enough. It's not working, so do it more.
Job creators, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not working. That's what they say because we're in a depression. But of course, it is working because they're getting what they want out of it, which is more power and more money to them. So it's always this kind of, weak need. That darn economy. No one really can know how it works.
Columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Welcome, gentlemen. So our lead story tonight, you heard David, our expert guest, talking about the huge problems in Iraq. How much of it, first of all, we know it's a crisis. How much of a problem is it for the United States?
I think it's a gigantic problem. The idea, and this has been talked about by experts for the last couple of years in particular, that it just becomes one big war, that the borders get erased, that the Sunni-Shiite splits. People are watching this. The Sunni-Shiite splits transcend borders and spread all over the region. And so people have been watching the Syrian civil war, they've been watching what's happening in Iraq on TV, and they're getting their sectarian anger is growing. And then you throw in some bad players who get manipulated one way or the other, and it could slide over. Then you have regional powers, you got Turkey, you got Saudis, the Iranians, everyone's getting involved. What I read, what I hear from the people who really are experts, it's, World War I, it's really a very perilous, extremely perilous situation.
So, Mark, how does one know what the right thing to do for the United States is?
I don't think anybody knows. I was fascinated by it to listen to the discussion, but because nobody is sure what to do today or tomorrow, most of the debate has been about what you did wrong yesterday. Did it begin in 2003 when the United States invaded and occupied and dismantled the entire Iraqi military, the entire Iraqi government, the entire Iraqi really public sector, and I think this is that. But then the other,
I think he brings up a good point with the dismantling of the entire Iraqi public sector, and this is what happens. So you see it in Libya too. You dismantle this apparatus, these state apparatuses that keep society going, albeit in Iraq a very brutal and ruthless fashion. That you keep the barbarians away because they're at the gates for most of the time in these sorts of places. You see it in the dissension into warlordism in Libya. Now Libya is in a much more isolated position than Iraq is, right in the center of everything, and so it's far less dangerous towards world security. But what's going on in Iraq is an example of what happens when you rip apart these systems
Yeah, and let it be a lesson to the anarchists, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like what you do creates abreactions, cause and effect. If your thing is just to remove this lackluster system or system that has faults, then you create other things that take its place and move into the vacuum that was created. So,
and that people that move into that vacuum are usually the most radical, the most aggressive, the most brutal types of people or in organizations like the ISI.
ISIS. Yeah.
ISIS.
Okay, and it becomes, well, no, we did give them a chance. We built them up. We trained them. We supplied them. But leaving in 2011, was that the problem? And I don't think, Judy, I mean, it's sort of as a default position, it becomes, let's bring in air power. And you don't just bring in air power. I mean, we saw that in Afghanistan this week where 5 Americans were killed in friendly fire by a B-1. You have to have the surveillance, the reconnaissance, the information, the analytics on the ground to exactly where, especially with a shifting battlefield.
And the president has said no boots on the ground, troops on the ground, and yet you would need your...
Hold him to that.
How about no boots on the ground, no planes in the sky? How about that? I like that one a lot better. Because you down a plane, then what? Let the regional players that have interests in the region do something about it. I just heard a statistic just recently saying that Iraq is now the 7th biggest oil producer in the world. That's from the beginning of, prior to the Iraqi war, they were second. So, they're not a strategic interest of oil resources or anything. We have nothing going on there, even in the in the cynical realpolitik level of it. Like, we don't need to be over there anymore at all. So,
and you need either Marines or Special Forces. You need people there to say these are the coordinates. This is exactly what we do want. And we don't. The last thing in the world you want to do is have civilian casualties and deaths and collateral damage, and So it is a Hobson's choice of the worst kind.
And David, you have the man who ran against Barack Obama, President Obama, in 2008, John McCain, saying the whole national security team needs to be thrown out. The president needs to fire them all and bring a whole different group in. What does the president do with it? I mean, how do you make...
So McCain is just always for war, no matter what.
No matter where. Ukraine, Iraq, Iran,
Mars.
Wherever it is. We'd be in 15 wars right now with McCain.
The moons of Saturn. It's just anywhere that can be bombed, he wants to bomb it. And like he said in town hall meetings before, he's like, well, I know power. Like, I know what power is. It's like, really? You know what power is? Wow. Like, you act like a schoolyard bully, and, like, that's power to you? That's great.
It's a decision like this.
Yeah, well, I don't know about trying them all out, but McCain's, I think, record has been reasonably good in the last 4 or 5 years. I think he, when the thing happened in 2011, he pretty much warned that this would happen. He warned very early on that the Syrian civil war would spill over.
Yeah, because he was writing checks to rebels.
Yeah.
And so I do think whatever decision he made in 2003 to support the original invasion, what he predicted has come through over the last few years. And
wow.
We're in a bad situation.
He's Nostradamus, basically. So if
you're able to see things the way they are.
Oh, my goodness. If you're signing off on John McCain's judgment, wow. Jesus, man.
I do think we somehow have to get involved. As the panel said,
of course,
it has to be political. I think they do have to commit to them. The Iraqi constitution is a regional constitution. It's a federal constitution which devolves a lot of power. That didn't happen in practice. Maliki centralized everything, and that was obviously a poisonous and terrible decision. But it was certainly the case that when the U.S. forces were there, they, could block Maliki from being ultra-sectarian, and Ryan Crocker and people like that, and they could simply put tanks in the way, so when the Shiites want to do something oppressive to the Sunnis or vice versa, they could just get in the way. Now, we're not going to go back to that world, but the idea that we can do nothing and allow this to spill over and allow the ISIL to really, completely rancid organization to take over large swaths of the Middle East, that seems to me perilous in the extreme. So I don't know the practicalities of what we do and how we sequence this, as Al-Khalid was saying, but I do think the president's posture, which is very forward-leaning for him, I think that's the right posture.
And Mark, are you confident the president has the right people around him to make these decisions?
I don't know, Judy. I mean, I certainly think John Kerry and
no, not John Kerry. He'll get you in a war.
Bring to him something that has been missing from most deliberations, and that is people who know combat and know the price that it involves, who aren't armchair commandos and talk about it. I mean, John McCain, David can argue about his consistency. In 2003, John McCain had an enormous responsibility, and he was an uncritical cheerleader of that war. I mean, he could have, and let's be very blunt about it. Democrats were cowed. An awful lot of Democrats were terrified at that time of being accused of being soft on terrorism, and they weren't alone.
Yeah,
so the Congress really abdicated in 2003, and that law is still on the books. I mean, the vote was actually in 2002, the invasion was 2003. That law is still on the books. The president has that authority still.
I want to turn the corner to the big political explosion in this country this week, David, which was Eric Cantor, House Majority Leader, top Republican in the House. No one saw.
So, first of all, they're saying the authorization to use military force is still on the books. So, get to work, start, just that kind of appeal to, well, he doesn't need to go to Congress anyway because we're still living in this semi-totalitarian police state post 9/11 with this war psychosis still somewhat fresh in the air.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to be repealed. So we need to get the power to go to war back to Congress. So we can't have these adventures. And luckily, Obama is self-serving enough not to take the bait. But Hillary
jump in.
Yeah,
she'll go for
Ben
it.
Sass.
Ben Sass, for
jeez.
Sure.
Jeb Bush.
That's the problem with I would see with Ben Sass and this guy David Brat is that they're very religious, and that sort of apocalyptic Tea Party libertarian ideology is very conducive for just let go and let God. And you certainly don't want that sort of mentality when you're running a nation state that has a huge military.
Yeah, you don't want that plunging into a giant regional war in the Middle East and just, another Iraq and Afghanistan or even worse.
Yeah, probably worse.
Lost.
Well, it teaches us a few things. First, you can't buy elections. I mean, Eric Cantor outspent him by zillions to one. I think almost outspent him on steakhouses alone compared to Brat's entire campaign. And so the limits on money were, once again, for the 8 millionth time, illustrated that you can't buy elections. I think the core story, there are two things. The core story of what caused the defeat.
Yeah, say something enough, becomes right, I guess.
The core story that I think caused the defeat was people wanting some respect, feeling that Cantor had gotten out of touch with the district, too high in might.
See, this is all codes for our living standard is declining. What's going on? You're not serving our interests. This guy is at least giving us some alternative to you. Mm-hmm. And he sort of hits the right social buttons as well. That just shows the fed up, the real, regular, everyday Americans with the current, Eric Cantor is certainly a member of the current ruling class.
Just a smug, just
plutocrat, out of touch,
cozy, just.
Yeah, and there's another thing we should watch during that we'll put on next, where it shows the smugness and the revolving door nature. I mean, I don't know, a lot of this stuff everyone knows about the revolving door of politics, but content.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in steakhouses made me suggest they were right. And so I think he just lost touch with the district. The implication that will be drawn is a much more ideological one, which was that Republicans cannot touch immigration. Republicans cannot compromise. And it is simply a fact that...
but the big power in Republicans want that. They want immigration reform desperately. This is a major issue with a lot of big money, big producers, Republicans. I mean, Walmart, they certainly want this. McDonald's, absolutely. Big agriculture things.
Yeah.
They want immigration reform, and they're coming up against these Tea Party radicals that are so deep in their ideology of, I would say, racism a lot of times, xenophobic at least, that they just cannot broach the subject. They cannot say this. And it's going to split the Republican Party. This is what slavery was to the Whigs, immigration is to the Republicans. It's going to collapse our party.
Ray did a study where they asked Republican voters to analyze their own members of Congress. And Republican voters think their members of Congress, Republicans, are much more centrist than they are. Democrats the voters line up pretty well with their members of Congress. Republican voters do not think that. And so they are of a mind to fire a certain number, and Eric Cantor was one.
And what does that say? I mean, what does all this say about the Republican Party?
Well, you put the question best. You said, nobody predicted it, nobody did, all the pundit class, and ever since the pundit class, as soon as the polls closed, the pundit class, all card-carrying members, two of them sitting here, but with rare exceptions, had a total explanation as to why it happened, why Eric Cantor lost, and why Brad won, Dave Brat won. And Judy, it just strikes me that Winston Churchill said it best: the winners get to write history. And Dave Brat said what his campaign was about, and he said the principal difference between himself and Eric Cantor was immigration. He said that was what defined him. And the reality is that he won. Eric Cantor lost. I think David's statement.
That's good analysis there.
Sounds like a coach, after a
it's like John Madden talking about football or something.
You gotta go north-south. You gotta go east-west. Yeah, no good. Gotta go north and south.
Advertising Dave Brat's name. I mean, which Dave Brat didn't have. But I think that there's one factor that comes out of this, and been up on the Hill yesterday, and that is every member is terrified.
In both parties.
In both parties, but particularly
because they know they're not serving the interests of their constituents.
Immigration is dead. Let's be very honest about it. I mean, some people are trying to put a spin on this. There is no Republican who's going to raise this issue and say, we have to cooperate. We have to somehow accommodate the other side. We can work it out. That, if anything,
he's hitting the heart of the matter there.
Yeah, absolutely.
What Evan just said.
There is, spines are absolutely terrified on the Republican side right now. I mean, they just, they don't know.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out, we've been sitting here, at least I've been sitting here the last several weeks saying the establishment.
Well, the establishment politics, they don't have anything to point to say, look what we've done for you. As the living standard erodes, it's becoming so apparent.
Yeah. I mean, imagine the Chinese, Politburo or ruling class or, leading political establishment, saying something, right? They're saying we're going to raise your living standard 13% every year for the next 5 years, So what does this ruling class have to offer other than just lies and demagogy and, just propaganda and brainwashing?
And stuff that they can beach ball back and forth, like gay marriage and always get the abortion fight going.
And that's not working anymore because people are continuing to fall into poverty because the system is squeezing them into it because the system is collapsing. And it's, GDP down by 1%. And while the stock market's just raging, So what's happening here? It's not serving the economy is not serving the interests of average people.
Winning this, the Tea Party's weaker.
Exactly. We were all saying the Tea Party was weaker.
Right.
And if
this is because
you take all those...
What'd she just say?
We're now saying that they were all saying that the Tea Party was weaker.
Yeah. Right, because the Wall Street was no longer using it to manipulate the people. They were no longer able to co-opt it. They couldn't keep riding that bull. They threw them off and wore them down, and they're like, "Well, this is over. We're just gonna, we're just gonna, we're gonna marginalize. We're gonna withdraw our support from it, and it will wither and die." With Dave Brat winning against Eric Cantor, that's not the case.
Yeah.
With the money power going in there, whatever the math is, 10. Well, God, what is the math?
Yeah, well, the real troubling thing is that Dave Brat is worse than Eric Cantor.
Yeah.
That's the real troubling thing to me, is that I'll take 10 Eric Cantors, plutocratic, two-faced politicians over a raging austerity demon.
Yeah.
Like cutting Social Security by 2/3. It's like something that, this guy can get support for. That's really dangerous.
Yeah, so the hope of it is that, walking the fine line of resisting the money will embolden people, the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party with the Elizabeth Warren wing to step out and speak out more with regard to these things that Dave Brat did. Now, the goal isn't to get Dave Brat in there because, God forbid we get someone running on a repeal Social Security by 2/3 and win campaign. If you really love your parents that much and want them to live with you, God bless you, but that's not...
It's not something you should put on a society.
Yeah, that's
and
not...
It's a major step back in human progress. In sort of human civilization.
They were fighting for Social Security for hundreds of years, and other names. They were looking. I remember reading French political economists back in the early 19th century, even turn of the 18th century, talking about social pension systems. So this was something that people wanted for a long time.
Because it's a real problem if you're in a labor society and you get old and you can't work, and I can hire somebody else, and peace.
Yeah,
good luck out there.
Economic downturn, whatever. You don't want the dignity of the old people being just thrown to the streets. It's barbaric. Yeah. So, but Dave Bratt's for it. So anyway.
To fulfill some sort of
hopefully
to appease his Austrian god of economics.
Mises
free market ideology.
Yeah,
Tea Party, and so to me, it's really a horrible outcome for the Republican Party.
Really?
Yeah, it's going to break them.
I think the overwhelming data on this, if the Republican Party does not get right on immigration, it's a threshold issue.
It can't.
Do not do well.
It fundamentally can't, as we'll see with the Whigs as we go forward, because they can't get right with immigration because it's the issue they cannot touch. If they touch it, they are destroyed. If they continue to resist it, they'll be destroyed a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And that's the slower road to collapse, and so that's the one they're picking. So, that's why they need to get the presidency and then drastically restrict the franchise of voting and, have the austerity dictatorship, as has been talked about.
Yeah.
And every day there's more evidence that comes out, more survey data and everything. And so I think this makes it extremely unlikely the Republican Party does get right, or some sort of immigration reform.
Could I say I agree with David. 2016 should be a Republican year. You've got a president in the third term.
Jesus.
They're like, this upset was totally unprecedented and we didn't see it coming at all. That said, the things we see into the far future are still going to hold true.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, they just, once again, they cannot, these guys, they're establishment insider cranks, so they can't talk about what's actually going on in the society because it's incredibly damning to their buddies on K Street and the major banks and the people that they wine and dine with, right? So they can't say our ruling class is totally fucking incompetent because that's what's happening.
Second term.
I mean by historical.
By historical. There's no Democratic third term. His numbers are a lot closer to George Bush's than they were to Ronald Reagan's or Bill Clinton's. And so it should be a Republican year. And yet the Republicans just gave the Democrats an enormous advantage for 2016. If they
are one congressional.
If immigration is going to be off the bench, and Jeb Bush is no longer a hot property for 2016
absolutely.
Because he is a pro-immigration candidate. And all of a sudden, if that becomes the third rail of Republican politics, that you can't raise that in the 2016 primaries, then you're going to be an older, whiter, more narrow, limited minority.
Irrelevant.
Party. And the Democrats just got unearned grace.
But how do you know this is going to last? I mean, that this nervousness about immigration.
If the Republican Party transforms into what it is, old white guys, and the Democrats have women, have blacks, have Mexicans, have Asians, have the young, the peace. The Republican Party, they're done.
So they're not seeing the underlying political shifts that are resulting in these things like Dave Bratt taking the primary.
Is this something that has legs that is going to stick?
Yeah, absolutely.
My instinct is that it will. Now it's complicated. Rand Paul, he's sort of welcoming to immigration. Christie, a lot of leading candidates are much more pro some sort of comprehensive reform than the vote we just had. Nonetheless, this...
Right. So, but what happens to those candidates when they try to run on the Republican Party, which is angry white people?
They get trounced. They get trounced by these Tea Party demagogues, free market radicals, austerity.
How are they going to square this circle? It's just impossible. So, God forbid they get in, because with their collapsing voter base, the only way for them to sustain power is basically destroy of what we refer to as like modern democratic society. Mm-hmm. Basically, and have austerity so bad and have crushing of labor so extreme that they're unable to mount a resistance. That labor cannot get its act together. Basically, it's fascism is what we're talking about. That's the only way they're going to be able to solidify power if they win in 2016, or even leading up to it.
Underlines what will be evident in town halls as people are running which is a lot of fervor on this vote side, on the anti-immigration side or anti-reform side. And it's going to be hard for any candidate, especially a whole bunch of them, to resist it.
And the message is, we come in the night, we travel light, we don't have a big media buy, and we come upon you, and we don't need millions of dollars.
The Tea Party.
The Tea Party, and we'll beat you. And we just beat Eric Cantor.
You're speaking in parables now, or what is this?
House Majority Leader has ever lost a primary, this was unthinkable.
Does it matter whether they elect one of their own to be a leader, to hold a leadership position in the House of Representatives?
I think they're a part. I think the Tea Party, all due respect, is a party of opposition. It identifies grievances. It's not much of an advocate. I don't know what
it's very nice. I read Dave Bratt's book, Political Theory on John Locke. And it's a very bold, very good book, by the way.
No, wonderful. Wow, what a shock.
No.
Very bold. And
protect the Lord. Protect your liege.
Wrapping up Hillary Clinton. She's had a very mixed week because the Tea Party, if she's the nominee, makes it much more likely the Democrats will win.
That's right.
But if she's sort of there and Iraq is exploding, that's really bad for her. So
they're like, we're not learning anything about anything of what the fuck is happening. Because we just saw that the money power just got trounced 50-1. That they came in and spent 50 times as much as Dave Bratt did, and they lost. Like that is something is going on there in the political landscape. That's not everyday average, armchair, football politics. That's social shifts, that don't happen but once every few generations.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening now, and these idiots, they can't see the parallels.
Blinded by their own sort of, need to fit in the old paradigm.
Yeah, they're comfy. They're not looking to rock any boats. A little more to touch on the thing with Dave Bratt and Eric Cantor and the Social Security, with Dave Bratt running on a platform of cutting Social Security by 2/3. Here's a recent poll by Pew Research Center. 67% of people think that benefits should not be reduced in any way in regards to Social Security. 31% think yes, and of that, 25% of that total block of 31% think that it should not be reduced, but just maintained at the current level. And only 6% polled said that they want it phased out as a government program. And then 27% of the 67% of people said that they did not want it to be reduced in any way, think it should cover more people and expand with greater benefits. So there you go. Like, how are you going to win on that platform unless he just totally buries that? But like the AARP are like, really good at sniffing out people that are looking to cut Social Security.
Yeah. And
this guy would be really amazing for him to win, because he's not going to get any support from the establishment Republicans that have the big bucks that could maybe send him over the top again in a general election. But he's only placating this ever shrinking minority of radical libertarians and lunatics. So the recent Elizabeth Warren refinancing student loans act down to 3-point-something%.
I think it's 5.7.
3.57?
Or 7.5.
It's basically what new subsidized federal loans are issued at. Mm-hmm. They want to subsidize those down to that. It's a pretty, upon learning the details of it, it's fairly minor, actually. But it is something that Obama can, latch onto, get a bump, popularity, things like that. And it is, it's something.
Yes, absolutely.
So it is a
toehold.
It's a toehold where even the kind of cowering and Wall Street Democrats would be willing to sign on to it because it doesn't threaten the banking cartel at all. So, this is the kind of middle of the road thing that Warren can run, get support behind, and then illustrate in very stark terms to the American people what the Republicans stand for. So, here's a good article on it. It was, of course, it had 58 votes in the Senate and it was filibustered, of course, just in name, basically vetoed by the Senate with their nonsensical filibustering powers. And then the interesting thing that came out of this was, that obviously Mitch McConnell would, and like in his ilk, would filibuster it, that's not news. But how the media then portrayed that filibuster is interesting. Here's the headlines. Reuters, U.S. student loan refinancing bill fails Senate hurdle. NPR, bill to allow refinancing of student loan dies in Senate.
Jesus.
Wall Street Journal, Senate blocks bill to lower student loan interest rates. Washington Post, Elizabeth Warren's bill to refinance student loan dies in the Senate. Bloomberg, Senate blocks Warren's student loan refinancing measure. Okay, do you feel informed? Do you know who blocked it? Who's to blame? Yeah, it's just this nebulous thing. Oh, it failed in the Senate, as if it was some kind of bipartisan thing. No, it was the Republicans. And ABC reports, Senate Republicans block student loan bill, because that's actually the headline. CBS, in the same vein. MSNBC, in the same vein. Mother Jones, in the same vein. So you have some mainstream news outlets. MSNBC obviously would cover that because they're, fake left. But CBS and ABC also just laying it out as it was that the Senate Republicans blocked the bill. But you can see the establishment and how they are always hedging and restructuring and mind warping with how they portray what's going on. So NPR, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Bloomberg, Reuters, these are establishment mouthpieces. So, it just really shows the stark contrast not only of what the Republicans are for, but of course where the media is standing on that. And even for ABC and CBS to be kind of off the reservation and how they're positioning that language is kind of interesting, right? Because, these companies are like losing money every quarter. They're going down in the news outlets because they realize that if they just want to toe the line, that people aren't buying it anymore and they're not going to listen to them.
But they're all owned by these big Wall Street conglomerates, so it's not like they need money.
Yeah, well, there it is, though. They are shifting the rhetoric to be more in line with reality. So it's something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just shows you the media bias that it's not left right. Something like NPR, which is always just railed by the Republicans, is defending the Republicans, right? Yeah. So the agenda here is deeper than that. You got to look beyond that left-right stuff. Yeah, the Republicans are radical. They're totally oligarchical. They're fascists. They need to be destroyed immediately. But then what's going on, right? The NPR and all this stuff, they're trying to prop them up. They're trying to bail them out, trying to hold them up to have this party duopoly. Because a party reorganization, when one party collapses, you have the threat that there's going to be some kind of populist upswing out of that, especially, the context of why these parties are collapsing, right? So they're just trying to maintain the status quo as long as possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, but anyway, Elizabeth Warren is not giving up, obviously. She's coming back louder and stronger, going on a national tour to support this bill, and, great.
Yeah, absolutely. From what I'm reading about that is that it's where if you're on Huffington Post or anything, so those left-leaning websites, Elizabeth Warren is their rock star that they're trying to get to run for president. Right now, of the field of Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, Ben Sasse, or Elizabeth Warren, I gotta go with Warren out of that group.
But I would just be hopeful that we would get some kind of person in the Secretary of State and the spy boss and all this stuff that would, not drag the administration into war or some other kind of mechanism of control or blackmail or something to manipulate her. I don't know.
Yeah. Elizabeth Warren and Thomas Piketty discuss nature and income inequality. if they mean nature like trees and forests, then that's an interesting combo. Because that would be the second thing that they tried to piggyback, sort of austerity, which in the form of climate change, to income inequality. And also with Piketty being there, they're going to want a tax, some huge tax. Let's get going, I guess. I think.
Sure, we'll play some of it.
This program was made possible by a contribution from the Patriotic Millionaires, because our country is more important than our money. PatrioticMillionaires.org. At Patriotic Millionaires.
It's not the millionaires you got to watch out for, it's the billionaires.
Yeah.
They're the real problem.
Welcome to a special edition of HuffPost Live. We're here in Boston at the Old South Meeting House, which is the birthplace of the actual Tea Party. The real one.
The real one.
So I'll be your host. I'm Ryan Grimm of the Huffington Post, and I'm joined here by two people who have written books that have surged to the top of Amazon, New York Times bestseller list. The first one, Capital in the 21st Century, by Professor Thomas Piketty. The second by Senator Elizabeth Warren, A Fighting Chance. Mm-hmm. Senator Warren's book makes the case that the system is rigged on behalf of the rich and against the middle class. Professor Piketty's book
doesn't make the case. It just talks about reality, that the game is rigged against the middle class.
It's like they looked out their window and saw a rain cloud and called it a rain cloud.
Or Elizabeth Warren does, except he makes the empirical point that this has been happening for 250 or more years.
Well, throughout human history, this is a dynamic that's been going on.
Yeah. Tell us what you made of Capital.
Okay, so I will get to describe your book in front of you. I like this. So I saw it as a book that had a pretty straightforward thesis. The rich get richer, and everybody else gets poorer. That kind of says what this book is about, and what Dr. Piketty has done is drawn the data together to show how this has happened across countries, across time. And I have to say, the first thing I thought when I read this book, or one of the first things, is I thought George Bush Sr. was right. Remember when he called trickle-down economics voodoo economics? Dr. Piketty assembled a lot of data to show that, in fact, wealth does not trickle down, it trickles up.
It evaporates.
It trickles from everyone else to those who are rich. And he demonstrates with his data that it keeps happening, as I said, over time and over country.
Yeah, I guess even with how degraded our culture and society is, even getting the hardened reactionaries to realize that inequality is a problem is, I guess, a huge first step.
Yeah, for sure.
Making baby steps.
I'd rather have a more actionable, how this needs to get done.
That's one possible outcome.
That's what we're for.
Yeah.
There's nothing inexorable or there's nothing natural in there. It really depends on a set of forces. It depends on the institutions that we choose. It depends on
absolutely.
Not only in the fiscal domain, but also, education, the diffusion of education and knowledge can be a powerful force pushing toward a reduction in inequality, both between countries and also within countries, assuming everybody has access to the skills, the jobs, and so, educational institution in the labor market, minimum wages, is part of what can make a difference. Right now the real value of the minimum wage at the federal level in the US is less than what it was in the 1960s, which is quite peculiar that, a country half a century later has a lower real minimum wage. And of course taxation of income, inherited wealth, which to a large extent was invented in this country, tax progressivity. Can make a difference. So all these different forces, education, social institution, taxation can and sometime in the past, have been able to produce different outcomes. Again, particularly in this country.
But
He's so French,
going
it
to your
hurts.
point about whether or not this is inexorable, whether
I
it
speak
has
French
to
and
be
so I'll
this
do
way.
subtitles.
I think there's 2 points that are made simultaneously. It's why I started with the question about trickle-down economics. Because I think the myth behind trickle-down economics was that if we let the rich retain more of their wealth, somehow that's going to flow down to everyone else, and it will make us all wealthy.
Faith-based position
And so I read
will
the first
just
part of
magically
this
all work
message
out
as
free market
this is
style.
simply not true. It doesn't work that way. It's not like gravity, that somehow if we hold it up here, it will trickle down over time. But that the second point is also powerfully true. What happens in the distribution of wealth over time depends importantly on the government, on the policies that any government follows that can either make this problem a better problem, that we can get more equality in an economy, or that we make it a worse problem and exacerbate it.
Equality and prosperity is something I would like to add to that. Not just equality, I want prosperity and a rising standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
We took a lot of questions from the public here, and actually a lot of questions were about this particular issue and specifically on taxation. I wanted to read one here from a Move On member, as a matter of fact, Lars from Georgia. Lars wants to know, how do you propose to convince more wealthy people that taxing themselves at a fair rate is actually in their own interests as well as ours?
You get a mass movement and you demand it.
Yeah.
These are demands. These aren't negotiable. Please, may I?
Did he just tacitly admit there that the government is owned and operated for and by the rich?
Yeah.
He's like, if the rich tax themselves because they totally control the apparatus of state. That's kind of what he said.
Mm-hmm. So the difference between taxation and voluntary giving is that for taxation, in principle, it takes a majority to take decision, and not everybody has to agree. So that's the short answer. Is that if you wait for each single individual to be willing to pay more tax, of course that can take a long time. But
however, we're not exactly one person, one vote here anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So what?
Not in a post-Citizens United world.
No, that's the biggest danger with rising inequality is that at the end it creates rising access to political voice, political power, and this can make it even more difficult. But at the same time we have better information technologies, better opportunities to spread information and to have new forms of political mobilization than ever. So I think I'm not as pessimistic as what a number of people seem to be after they've read my book, and I feel really sad that some people were depressed apparently after they've seen that. And I think there's room for reasonable optimism as well.
But your question about how you persuade people that they should pay more taxes if they already have a great deal. I think part of this, though, goes to the question of the integrity of the tax system itself. A world in which anyone, rich or of moderate means, looks left, looks right, and says, wait a minute, that guy gets a tax loophole, that guy gets to move his property overseas and doesn't get taxed on it, this guy gets a break for moving jobs overseas, that one over there gets a special deal. The cost of that is not just a cost in dollars, it's a cost in integrity in the system. And when people feel like we're not all in this together, we're not all sharing, we're not all paying a fair share of our income or our wealth, then I think that what you get is this sort of, it all comes unraveled. Everyone moves toward, I will pay the least because he's paying the least.
I don't think there was ever a time when it was this we're all in this together. That was more of a myth pushed by Republicans as a way to sell these things.
Communalism and communitarianism, I guess they would call it.
Sort of the weakness of the left being like, yeah, that sounds nice. We can be a part of that. We'll take it on the chin because, you'll get next time.
Yeah, and the rich are always going to want more to retain more of their whatever income.
Class privilege.
Call it, and their class privilege. And all that. So it's a perpetual class war. What has happened is that the post-World War II generation inherited such a progressive state with such progressive reforms, taking all that for granted and thinking that is somehow just things were just that way.
Yeah.
Without looking at all the underlying class warfare that happened for decades. Decades and decades prior to that, making that a reality. So that's really part of the problem here. And that is an issue that, the rich don't pay taxes. Oh, yeah, they definitely do not pay taxes.
Nope. He's cheating, so that means there's no reason for me to go ahead and be scrupulous about what I pay. So I think partly this is about, we're at a moment in American history that our tax system has become so riddled with loopholes. You talk to small business owners pay and pay and pay on taxes. They pay because the loopholes aren't as available to them. But you look at Fortune 500 companies that are profitable and end up paying zero in taxes.
Or negative.
When that happens, the cost is more than the dollars. The cost is the integrity of the system and the sense that we're all in this together.
That's certainly a cost, the integrity of the system, but a much deeper cost is the destruction of the American middle class. That's a huge cost that's much more, problematic than the integrity, than some sort of feeling about the system that we're not all in this together. That was never a real thing to begin with.
And it's her way of kind of shaping it in a way that isn't scary, I guess. It's appealing. It's appealing to a certain kind of wavelength of thought. You can really kind of see that in the language and how it's said. Because if they say
as a continuation of the weakness of the left, of just this always capitulation. We're so sorry.
Bestseller book, So if someone can even get to that level, then they can come to our next level. It's like, no, it's actually about perpetuating an underclass. It's about cultivating a slave society
to keep,
because that's what it really is. Read history.
Yeah,
this is commonplace. There was never a commonplace. We're all in this together, or if there were, those were very brief moments.
Yeah,
and really good things came out of them, but that wasn't the norm by any stretch of the imagination.
So the first place for me that we have to start this is we have to clean up the tax system we've got. That has to be the first step.
It's a step. I think it's the most important one.
That's laudable, and that would be a big fell swoop. Also, just realize though that when you're saying clean up the tax code, that's a bigger fight than even the Wall Street sales tax. It's in a way even a bigger fight than opening a credit window at the Federal Reserve. Well, why is that? Because if you're saying we're going to drive a bulldozer through the tax code, every single congressional person, every single financial interest of any clout has a loophole in there that they have engineered and putting in there, right? So you're saying I'm going to take a battle that unites the oligarchy and the lesser 5%ers against it. Right, rather than something else like nationalizing the Federal Reserve, or even partially. That sounds huge until you actually start talking about it like this and realize that, who's getting the credit, under what terms? Yeah, there would be factions much more opposed to it than others, but you're not fighting a completely united.
Absolutely, you could get you can get Caterpillar on your side.
Yeah, exactly. You can get Halliburton and these guys.
Yeah,
right. You want to rebuild 1,000 bridges.
Yeah.
Hey, huge contractors. We got contracts for you.
Miami to
you want
Seattle,
that money?
Maglev bullet train.
Yeah. Who wants to build that? Right. All the steel producers, all those factions. Right. So that's a divide and conquer strategy, and it's daunting enough as it is. But saying I'm going to tackle the complete tax code, that's a rough one. Right. I mean, as much as it needs to be done, saying that that's the first step just doesn't show any tactical knowledge of how to fight these political battles. It's right there with Piketty's global wealth tax, right?
Yeah, very
totally ambitious.
Utopian.
Yeah, it identifies one of the biggest problems, but just realize you're fighting a political battle. So treat it like a battle.
Speaking of integrity and the power of big money, you've recently been on the receiving end of some of that power. So I think apparently a lot of people are familiar with this row with the Financial Times. You rebutted this week. Basically, they said he made some math errors. It turned out that the Financial Times just simply didn't understand how to do the equations. So even after that was pointed out, though, they followed up with this, and I want to read you their follow up and get your reaction to it. This is Chris Giles writing. He said, "Further debate on many of these items is difficult because Professor Piketty accepts he makes still undocumented adjustments to his data. The sources he has appear to be secondary to Professor Piketty's prior expectations of what the data needs to show." Now, beyond that being an incredibly unself-aware statement, How would you respond to it? And do you plan to respond, or do you think this is over?
To me, this particular debate is over. But what's not over is, the quest for more transparency about income and wealth. And what I take from this debate is two things. First, I think people should be afraid more with the realities and with my book. And I think, my book is not the problem. The problem is rising inequality. The fact that the fact that top wealth holders have been rising 3 times faster than the size of the economy, not only in the US but also in Europe and also at the world level. You take the ranking of Forbes billionaires and you have them all across magazines all over the world. The top of the list has been rising 3 times faster than the size of the world economy. Now, if the Financial Times have a different ranking, they should publish it.
Right.
But apparently they don't have it, so they should stop. And but what I take from this, as a positive matter, is that there is a strong lack of transparency, in particular about cross-border assets, offshore wealth, and this is really very close to what Elizabeth was saying right now. Globalization is a positive-sum game, and I am attached to globalization, economic openness. But ultimately, it is the interest of everybody, the rich, big companies, and also the Financial Times that's defending them, that everybody...
Globalization with an infrastructure program would be a net positive. Globalization where you're just shipping labor around to cut costs is not a net positive.
Yeah. Also, he's talking about the concocted scandals against his book regarding statistics, and even The Economist was talking about this in the last edition. Look at the body of economic academia, right? That even something as seemingly cut and dry as statistics can't even be talked about without being countered or, you aren't interpreting these correctly, you're not taking the doctored statistics that we want to pretend are the main ones, like GDP numbers, for example. Gold deposits at the Fed. There's a fake number, and then there's some other number that you would have to have an investigation to figure out. What is it with GDP? Well, there's a cooked number. What is it with unemployment statistics? There's a cooked number. So it's such a snake pit of deception and lies that even on the most basic level of presenting statistics, they're attacking each other on what is reality. So when you even get to the level of theory, totally forget about it. They can't even agree on what the facts are, much less the theories.
Which I think is a tactic of just keeping the system going.
Yeah.
Just make it so complicated and convoluted, and I don't touch your facts, and I've got this huge platform, Financial Times, big muckety-muck, fancy.
Yeah, and The Economist are throwing barbs against this guy's book because he's talking about inequality, and with all the other flaws of the book, that's really good.
It's a fair share from globalization, and for this, we are going to have a treaty between Europe and the US. That's 1/4 of world GDP plus 1/4 of world GDP. That's 1/2 of world GDP. So it's a lot of responsibility, and we cannot just go for more trade liberalization. We also need more regulation, in the social, environmental, and fiscal domain. For instance, we need to make sure that multinationals and very high net worth individuals pay their share. Their fair share in taxes. You cannot just make huge profits from free trade and then pay no tax anywhere. You have to find some balance so that everybody is ready to make an effort. What I take from this debate is, again, we certainly know too little about the dynamics of wealth and income. I'm trying to produce more data, but, it's certainly imperfect. I agree with this. In fact, the main reason why I am in favor of, some form of taxation of wealth and cross-border exchange of information and a registry of cross-border financial assets is so that we know more about wealth dynamics. And, it's a bit sad that today all we can do is to buy magazines to know more information about wealth dynamics. And, it would be better if people could read, the official government publications or IMF or Eurostat.
It's a sad request, and it's almost kind of just totally self-serving.
Yeah.
He's like, I had to investigate way too much to get these statistics for this book I was writing, so my demand for changing society is to make these statistics more available by showing what's offshored and showing what's cross-border and what's all this dark money pool circulating the world. Yeah, whatever.
Understand what's going on to the different groups in society in terms of wealth and income. Without this democratic transparency and democratic accountability, we cannot adjust our policy, and we cannot have a rational peaceful conversation about these important issues.
Senator Warren, you've been on the...
I was just going to say that, but it sounds to me like you just explained why there are a lot of people who won't want to see more data about wealth inequality out there.
You're right. But, democratic institutions can be stronger.
We hope.
So you've been on the receiving end yourself of plenty of counterattacks. Any advice for Professor Piketty?
Now, get back.
So back to inequality. It was the shocks of the two world wars that lessened inequality throughout much of the 20th century. But I'm wondering if the reverse might actually be true. In other words, was it a coincidence that on the eve of World War I we had historic levels of inequality? If you look at the situation in Ukraine now, you have high inequality and you have oligarchs battling for resources. Is there? You demonstrated a connection between war and inequality. Does it go the other way? Could there be a connection between inequality and war?
You can almost call it imperialism. You'd be right.
It's like he read the definition of imperialism.
Put it
in the form of a question.
It's the Jeopardy question for imperialism. What is imperialism?
Response is sometimes, a possible response to extreme inequality. So you start to blame, foreign workers, or to blame your neighbors, or to blame. So certainly, in France and in Europe, we could see that a week ago, and people voting for extreme parties, partly because they don't know how to solve their domestic inequality or unemployment problems. So they blame the European Union, they blame Germany, they blame China. There's always someone to blame. So yes, nationalist response and sometimes war or conflict can be aggravated by inequality. Now let me say that there are many, of course, in history. Wars have played an important role in changing the distribution of income and wealth, particularly in Europe. But there are more peaceful ways to change the distribution. And in fact, the democratic responses and the rise of free schools, the rise of social policies, the rise of progressive taxation, which occurred after World War I, after the Great Depression, after World War II, were partly a response to the war, but were also partly a response of the democratic process themselves. And particularly, I guess in the U.S. The way progressive taxation of income and inherited wealth was invented in the 1920s and 30s, was not just due to World War I or the Bolshevik Revolution, which was much less important in the American political scenes than in Europe. And still, these new institutions were invented by U.S. democratic institutions. So, there's a lot to learn from our common history, and we should not just believe that these issues started 10 years ago. These issues have been with us forever, and there's a lot to learn by putting them into this broad.
He's almost completely summing up what the problem with the left is, right? No conception of ruling class power, of oligarchy, of imperialism. He didn't say imperialism once. He was citing wars as some kind of nationalist response, as he said. Well, that's a huge misnomer. That's mixing in like things in the same pot, right? So if you can have an oligarchy that has some kind of public demagogue which can incite patriotic fervor in the people and they can go to war over it, well, I guess that if you want to look at just the surface of that thing and call it a nationalist response, that's a real pathetic level of analysis, right? So if you're going to look deeper than that, you're going to see other things. And if you're not looking deeper in that, you're going to fall into the same problems. Unfortunately, this time, World War would be infinitely more catastrophic. So the need for analysis is highly critical, and this level of tepid leftism and analysis just won't cut the mustard.
The historical and international perspective.
But Dr. Piketty has proposed, as probably most of you know, a global wealth tax, which is kind of an extension of the property tax to include a tax on other forms of property, stock, investment.
So remember when Senator Warren was talking about bulldozing the tax code? Mm-hmm. Imagine doing that for every country in the world.
Yeah, that would unite the top 5%.
Yeah, he's like, I'll outdo you. I see you, Warren. I'm raising you. World stakes, dropping a bulldozer through every oligarchy's tax code in every country that, exists.
Yeah, I don't know how you would ever do that.
That is the most impossible thing I've ever heard in terms of political demands.
etc.
That's harder than a global
Tobin
Tobin,
even.
even.
By some people, but the income tax was called utopian 100 plus years ago. Could you talk a little bit about
we know how to do utopian.
US's experience with the income tax?
Well, it's partly about the notion that we were pretty appalled initially about the idea of an income tax, but we began to tell ourselves a story. And as I listen to Tom talk about this, think about every time how it's the story of our understanding of ourselves and why we're in these economic circumstances. So you talk about one of them is, in cases of extreme inequality, people blaming, political leaders blaming, say it's their fault, it's that group or that other country, and that this can lead us into war. There's also the question of how we describe at any given time the pressures on most people, on the economy. If you feel like, look, this is a work hard, play by the rules economy, and sure, there are some ups and downs
that has never existed.
But mostly,
so
if I work hard, my family's going to do okay. And better yet, if I'll cinch my belt a little, work really hard, my kids are going to have a chance to do a little bit better than that. Their kids will have a chance to do a little bit better than that. And that sets the stage, if you believe that, for everybody to participate in an economy. You get a lot of stability, you get a lot of production, you get a lot of hard work, you get a lot of investment in the future, you build a strong and robust future. At that moment, an income tax is part of it. It's part of how we finance the things we do together. And we do it progressively, partly because people have more, partly because they have been rewarded by what we have done together. And we all have this sense of shared responsibility and shared investment in the outcome. When the thing starts to break apart is when you have people beginning to feel, wait a minute, that's not how the game works anymore. Just to pick an example, those who are rich have managed to help rewrite the rules so they get more and more. So they get breaks in taxes and get to keep more. So the regulations...
These were the rules before there was this huge economic fight by the working class.
Yeah.
The rich used to keep all of it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a non-historical
view of what's going on. I mean,
and even worse than that, it's non-militant. Like I want some militantism from the political movement, like they're realizing that they're in a fight for their lives and their freedom, because that's what it is. So, will this level of kind of namby-pamby explanation work? I don't know. I mean, she's making best-selling books, so clearly there's some kind of population out there that when I'm talking about World War III, obviously it's too much, right? It's too much truth for most people to handle. So she gives enough truth where the kind of people in the middle will be moved in a direction realizing these problems. I guess that's good, And when they think about it longer and harder, people that are that much further along in conceptualizing this stuff and understanding it and talking truthfully about it, we'll be able to get them a little more organized, a little more militant, a little more not taking no for an answer.
Tilt in their favor, so they have better business opportunities, so they have better ability to earn than everyone else who's out there working. And when that starts to happen, then what we get is we get a country that's headed in the wrong direction. When people start to feel like it's not about how hard I work, that I face the risk that I will work hard and end up with nothing. That's when the
not with just nothing, in debt forever.
Yeah.
And so
a slave.
The way I see this is we are right to talk about taxes, where taxes should be appropriately
including not your freedom
placed, which parts of wealth and income we want to tax. But it's fundamentally this question about whether or not the game is rigged. And the game right now in America is rigged. It is rigged so that those at the top keep doing better and better, and everyone else is under increasing pressure
of everyone else,
increasing economic strain.
See, that's what the militants would do.
Yeah, right. She's saying that and then saying this other thing, and it's like the causation is not illustrated.
If you think that the top 0.1% doesn't benefit from keeping wages really, really low, you're not paying attention to anything that's actually happening.
My view of that is why that is happening is not because it's inexorable, not because it had to be that way, but because those at the top can hire the lobbyists, can hire the lawyers. They can now, under Citizens United, affect the electoral system so powerfully that they get a set of rules written over and over and over, year by year by year. The rules don't get better for America's middle class. The rules are getting better for those who are a thin slice at the top. And that is the profound danger that we see from great inequality.
And there's a very particular way that the system in America is rigged, which you describe well in the book and just now. I'm curious, in your research, is it similar in other countries, or does inequality grow in different ways? Is there, in other words, is the power...
Almost, is there a historical norm for what is called class dynamics? Wow. Has anyone written a book on this topic?
I don't know. I've never even heard of it before.
Yeah. I mean, Socrates definitely didn't mention anything about the one, the few, and the many, and neither did Aristotle. And these conceptions are just brand spanking new. It's just the total, just super naive.
Yeah.
And perpetuating and willfully being naive. Like, how long can this go on? I don't know. It's the left's, the core of the left is their dedication to being dupes.
I know.
They just will not relinquish it for anything.
Dynamic, the same, but the particular ways that it plays out in different countries different.
I think some countries have been able to build more inclusive institutions than others.
Which ones?
Both in the educational domain. So like in Nordic European countries, although they are in fierce competition with one another, including for their tax system, they have been able to keep pretty inclusive system of investment in skills, so that not everybody is going to Harvard, but still they most very large part of the population have access to high skills and at the end of the day high paying jobs and in other domain as well. I guess institution regarding the financing of political parties and political life is certainly one of the important difference between a number of European countries and the United States these days. So there are very different social, legal, educational, fiscal institutions that can make that can make a huge difference at the end of the day in terms of inequality dynamics.
But notice the first place Tom...
I just want to congratulate myself for becoming so good at understanding that guy in 20 minutes. He's so French. He should have just a thing of croissants and be wearing a beret and have a baguette over his shoulder and
it's two bread items. That'd be too much.
Getting some fromage.
It goes to financing opportunity. It's about education. It's about making sure that everybody gets good education so that you've got talented kids who may not have been born into wealthy families but who will still have opportunities. I just expand that by saying it's about investments in infrastructure. Little business wants to start, it needs power to plug in. It needs roads to be able to get its goods to market. It needs educated workers to come in.
Oh, come on. You can do better than that. What about the maglev?
Come on.
What about the something brand new nuclear power plants?
Infrastructure, at least.
That was a plus.
Yeah.
We know that the greenies, though, they don't like actual anything. Building anything. Well, that's why she can't say,
I know.
Maglev, that goes through an endangered owl sanctuary.
Will just go away.
They'll take everyone down with them, but
no.
Yeah.
The sea level's going to rise. Okay, then we'll build dams. We'll figure it out.
Education. Well, people already really have access to any education that they want. I mean, not many exceptions. I mean, if you want to go into school and you want to get good grades, you can get as much debt as you like. Mm-hmm. But that's part of the problem. I hope she's hitting on that. It's not really that the access to the education is even really so much the issue. They're trying to reverse that, but as it presently stands, That's just not the right foot to get on what's what the social inequality problems are.
Yeah.
Kinds of investments.
And what about people who are not going to be college educated?
Yeah, that's where you start, is with a basis of people that just are regular Joes and Janes out there. Are they going to be able to be middle class? Are they going to be able to send their kids to college without having to be a huge burden on their family?
Yeah.
Are they going
blue collar?
to have health care? Is that going to be? Are they going to? That's where you build your base. That's your foundation of your economy. The higher stuff, the doctors, the lawyers, super engineers, and whatnot. That's all great, but you need that base of middle class, or else.
Yeah, the concrete layers, the people that are running the electrical lines, the people that are doing
they have to be able to make a living wage and be able to support a family on that wage.
Yeah, and give their family a better life than they had. There's this kind of more, once again, the yuppiness of the left, which they almost have like a contempt for anyone who's not college educated, and thinking that these people are just buffoons or idiots or something. It's like there's all kinds of incredibly interesting people that are not college educated and they have no interest in doing it. And for largely for the same reason that I had no interest in getting much higher levels of college education, is because it was a bunch of debt, and it wasn't going to teach me the things that I was interested in. So I could go off and learn that stuff myself, or just take the courses myself and learn that kind of stuff. So this leftist conception of everything is within a college campus is just really so myopic.
Well,
once again,
it came out of we have this declining standard of living, and they needed something to say, and something that can be, it's kind of an individualistic way to boo that Republicans will concede on, education, that they'll even give you a talking point that education is important as they try to get charter schools so they don't have to teach evolution. Instead of actually working class demands.
For which then everyone feels like, I got a piece of this. I've got an opportunity. I work hard, I play by the rules, I'm going to succeed. But a world in which those investments are undermined. Look at something like the Ryan budget, which in effect says, but remember, no, not you, sorry, Ryan. But look at the basic premise behind the Ryan budget. Preserve lots of loopholes for those at the top, cut taxes, right, for those at the top. And how do they plan to pay for it? By cutting the investments that create opportunity. Cut the investments in education, in infrastructure, in research,
making
the things that help build
profits
the future.
Private and losses
that
public.
That drives us
called
toward more inequality,
with an F.
but more critically,
feudalism.
The basic premise of this country of work hard, play by the rules. You got a stake in the outcome here.
And not to drag this in a more pessimistic direction, but
could it be in a more pessimistic direction?
Oh my God! Yeah, you're so realpolitik. It's almost like that their hope is wrapped in this naivete, and that they just don't have, they can't get mean enough to actually win a battle. So for them to really see the enemy for what it is, would make them just completely piss themselves. Yeah. It's just cowardice, really. Is the problem.
They can't believe that someone would actually be mean. That would actually do this, I press wages. I don't pay my workers if I don't have to.
I'm laughing about it. Yeah, sure. Why not? Look how pathetic they are. Look how the oligarchs probably think of the people, right? They're looking at Elizabeth Warren on this and God, they're so pathetic. You won't see reality. And I will. And since you won't, I don't give a shit about you. You're some lesser creature, right? Because, here's reality, staring you in the face, and you refuse to confront it. So, what are you, So
you're not a threat at all.
By being pathetic, you are even more contemptible by the elite. It just is this self-perpetuating situation.
And so
try
to fix the tax code, unite the oligarchy against you.
Yeah.
Good luck.
It's just this little kind of hand flapping, running in circles of just, and it's just so it's weakness and it's pathetic, and people need to get beyond it because.
And challenge people like Elizabeth Warren, who probably in a private moment would tell you the truth, real.
Yeah, under a hushed breath.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The way all liberals do, and then change the subject.
Yeah, and it's get in touch with your passion again. This isn't how you do it. And the problem with the left, the spineless, deballed, cuckold left,
That's a great way to put it.
Is they have no ferocity for life, and so you're going to lose. You're not going to win with that kind of attitude at anything. Anyone that's ever conquered anything or overcome any kind of adversity, look how stalwart they were and how much they were embodied and how much life they had. that all came from like knowing, being just most in touch with reality as they could possibly be. Mm-hmm. And it could be a frightening place at first, but the alternative is so much worse. Because in their worldview here and how they're operating, it's always tiptoeing around this question. It's never confronting it directly. Mm-hmm. It's always marginalizing it and, not looking directly in the eye of Sauron or whatever. And like you do that at first and it's frightening, sure. But then you like learn more about it and you're like, oh, like this is a system. It has weaknesses. Yeah. It has operations. It has structures to it. And therefore it can be destroyed. It can be disassembled. It can be taken apart. But you have to acknowledge it exists first. That's the first step. And so with them just skipping around the questions daintily, like skipping through a thing of tulips or something like that, of like, oh, wars are caused by nationalist upsurge or something like that.
Yeah.
Not talking about imperialism. Not talking about oligarchy. Not talking about usury. The big words, feudalism. These are the
class dynamics.
Yeah, class dynamics, oligarchy, plutocracy. These are the subject matter. This is what is actually being discussed, and the refusal to go to that extent of it is a refusal to interact with it directly.
And it leaves their flank wide open.
Yeah, and then, that's why they land on these absurd answers, such as, we're going to have a global wealth tax, or I'm going to bulldoze the American tax code. Not understanding the tactics of that is just complete folly.
Another move on reader, Diane from Florida, asked this one. How will the costs and consequences of climate change interact with economic inequality?
Oh, boy.
Well, I think it's nice that
here we go.
Climate change.
It's like the roller coaster just went down the slope.
We have much more difficult problems to solve than just exchanging bank information between countries. And if we are afraid with Switzerland and the Bahamas and we think they are too strong for us, then what are we going to do about climate change? So I think we have to solve this financial opacity problem, this lack of transparency right away, so that we can focus on the real issues. And part of the real issue is investment in education, investment in clean energy sources, and do something serious about climate change and
clean energy.
It's very sad that we are losing so much time in a way on secondary issues.
What are some things like
making
clean
sure
energy?
That I am from a country where even the president was unaware that his budget minister had a bank account in Switzerland. And
how much do you want to bet he's not going to follow that up with saying, I'm from a country which has like 80% nuclear power?
Yeah.
I had a glimmer of hope of hoping he was saying that. As another topic here, though, if we don't win this thing, am I really going to have to hear about global warming for like the remainder of my life?
Yeah.
It's just the perpetual doom that's like, that they're always saying is like right around the corner. I'm just going to have to hear about that this idiotic conversation. It's just like this little horrifying moment of realizing that.
Budget minister keeps saying, no, I don't have one, because he was sure that the French government will never get the information from the Swiss government. So, what is this world where we are losing time, where, are we going to be able to get this transmission of information? And at the end of the day, it's only because actually the United States government put sanctions on Swiss banks that this made a difference. So the good news is that, you can make a difference. These small territories are not so powerful because they are small. And if you have proper sanctions, saying, okay, we are all attached to free trade, but, you need to have some fair tax system.
Well, even acknowledging, like, what those moves actually were. It's not for the United States to say, oh, we're going to have an era of transparency and tax. We're going to know exactly where the flows of money are going. It's that the Swiss represent the Swiss largely. They're very patriotic people that serve their own interests. They care about themselves, which is in an enlightened fashion.
Yeah.
So them not falling in line with the other more Anglo-Saxon money laundering cartels is what that whole thing was about. That's not anything to do with some kind of new level of transparency or new kind of turning a new leaf of American policy. This is just infighting with the overall global pie of the loot shrinking. And now, the fratricide's coming out of them, the Swiss, they're cutting into our deposits, if we can have some targeted political attacks against them, we can free that money up and we can launder that money in Delaware and wherever else, the Cayman Islands. XYZ, just the list of money laundering places. So, once again, the naive nature of the left, they don't see the political infighting of the ruling class. They just think, that just came out of the blue, like this just fell out of the sky, right?
We can solve it and move on to much more important issues such as climate change.
Tom, you separate climate change from much of this other debate over inequality. I think they actually are the same debate occurring with different words. But think about it this way. We have, tens of millions of people who live right near coasts, just to pick one example. And so what's happening right now in the debate in the United States? There are giant industries that pollute, and the consequence is they make immediate profits, and the effects of their pollution will be felt by lots and lots of people around this country and ultimately around the globe. Now, it's in their interest to continue to be able
it's almost a trend going on.
Because they can make short-term profits, and everyone else will bear the costs. Think about it. They are able to amass the lobbyists to go to Washington, to influence the lawmakers, to influence the regulators, to do everything they can to maintain their opportunities to foul the air and poison the water in order to promote short-term profits.
And then privatize the stuff that's still usable.
Who has to pay the price on that doesn't have that same kind of organized ability to make their voices heard.
They did at one time. What was it called?
With lobbyists and lawyers in Washington.
There used to be places where working class people could go. They were called unions. Unions had these things. Were places where working class people could go to air their grievances.
And have some kind of pushback against, the people.
These people that she was talking about.
She's saying they're polluting, then that means that they're people that are working there, obviously, right at the front line of whatever pollution's coming out of it generally. Or they're going to be immediately affected by it. So, working standards, people getting, not having to work incredibly dangerous, life-threatening, life-shortening jobs, that comes from unions.
And so for me, this is just one more example of how we have inequality, of how we have a rigged system where a handful are able to reap benefits at the cost of everyone else. And I think that climate change, like economic inequality, are both symptoms of the same problem of those with power writing the rules too much in their favor and everyone else being left behind.
So we got a ton of questions submitted on one particular issue that jumped out, and that was actually student lending, which ties it. I don't know what the situation is in France. Here in the United States, there are probably two people up here who still have student loans, and there were a variety of different questions. But two, Barbara from Arkansas and Robert from Oregon, both Move On members, asked if you would support some version of student loan forgiveness. Do you think that we're headed in that direction where it's becoming so unsustainable that there might have to be some outright forgiveness?
So let me do a couple of facts on student loans. You'll sit down on these because, all right. So right now we have $1.2 trillion outstanding in student loan debt. 40 million Americans are dealing with outstanding student loans. Mostly young people, although I should add to this that people 60 and over collectively owe about $43 billion in student loans.
60 and over?
Yeah. Think about that. People who've guaranteed other loans, who went back to school later in life. So we've got a lot of student loan debt out here. Now, it's starting to be so much debt that it's dragging down the economy. The reports are starting to pile up from the Fed.
It's sacrificing our children and a generation of Americans, but damn it, it's starting to hurt the economy. Republicans, do you hear me? Like, what? The economy!
Oh, God, save it. Send the human shields.
From the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, from the Department, from the Treasury Department. And what it shows is that young people are not buying homes. at the rate we would anticipate. They're not starting businesses
moving
at
out
the
of
rate
the
we'd
parents'
anticipate. They're not buying cars.
basements.
They're just not doing the economic things we should expect them to do because they are so burdened with debt. So we've got a situation, and by the way, one more piece on it, just so we're getting the big data pieces.
Burdened with debt.
It's growing, and it's growing fast.
That's slavery.
Over less than a decade, the amount of student loan debt out there has grown by about 70%. So think about that. We're on a fast slope up in terms of debt. So what can we do about student loan debt? There are multiple things we can do. About the outstanding student loan debt, there are forgiveness programs. That's a piece of it. We could bring down the interest rate on all student loan debt outstanding. And here's a critical part of that. Keep in mind, for student loan debt outstanding, people have refinanced their home mortgages. Now that we're in a low interest rate environment, they have refinanced their business loans. They've refinanced their township loans. You can't refinance your student loans. So people out there are stuck in 7%, 8%, 9%. Just wave your hand when I hit your number. 10%. Yes, there we go. Student loan interest rates. The idea is, but this gets us right to the heart of what we're talking about. The idea for a bill right now that we've got pending, we've got more than 30 co-sponsors in the United States Senate, is Bank on Students is the title of it. And it says, let's refinance that debt down to 3.86%. That was the rate the Republicans in the House and the Senate agreed to last.
Like Goldman Sachs, you get interest at basically 0%, maybe 0.5%, something like that.
But that's
students.
You don't
4%.
want to start there. You want to start at -5, and then you can have all this room to fight and go back. Fine, 1%. If that's the best deal you can get, you don't start at your conciliatory position of like, oh, already so sorry. Yeah.
Serve it up on a platter. This is the weakness of the left.
Yeah, this is the
Will
weakness.
it be enough? Will it be enough? I have my doubts.
Yeah. Fine, we'll give you 5%. Ugh, you could have started at 0 and
gone
to 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Summer for all new student loans issued last
we never
year.
even negotiated like a car, like buying a car off a lot or something,
on graduate student loans. But let's refinance.
The Republicans are going to filibuster. They're going to do whatever they can to stop this.
In the game. Why does the U.S. government not just refinance that debt? And the answer is because that debt out there at 7%, 8%, 9%, 10% is producing tens of billions of dollars in profits for the United States government. In other words, it's in the government budget right now. Just one slice. The debts from 2007 to 2012, just that little slice of loans, is on track to produce $66 billion in profits for the United States government. So, to be able to refinance the debt down, we got to find that money somewhere else.
So here's the lowness that we have been brought to as a nation. That the government itself, if what she's saying is true, which I really have no reason to doubt it, is usuring the population.
Yeah.
The institution that has the authority to create credit out of nothing, and with that we can do, whatever we're capable of as a species, is instead turning around and usuring its own population, basically parasitizing off of its own population.
Well, it just shows you the government is run by the faction that benefits most from this, which is, Wall Street.
Right.
The big high finance is the institution that has the most power in the government, and therefore the government reflects that.
Yeah, and even adopts its mode of thinking and interacting.
Well, it makes sense with all the revolving door, back and forth.
Right. It's indistinguishable between the big imperial Wall Street banks and when she or they in this context are using the term as widely as quote unquote the government. Right. So anyway, just utterly pathetic of just where we're at.
In this bill is to say, fine, we'll pass the Buffett rule. Close up the loopholes so that billionaires pay at least the same rate of taxes that their secretaries pay.
Also, so weak that you're going to make them pay the rates of like a regular person, a billionaire?
Yeah.
What? Make them pay way more.
They're them pay 90%.
They'll be fine.
Yeah.
You're not going to affect their lives at all.
Yeah. Even if you tax them at 90%, it likely would not affect their life at all.
Yeah.
How many Lear jets can you actually have?
It just is another example of one of the main problems that leaves the left flank wide open.
Yeah. It's always backpedaling. It's always in this position of undercutting yourself at every step of the way.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so critical right in the middle of the inequality debate and what you started out talking about. This puts us directly, I can't think of a better way to put this. The United States as a country can invest in young people by putting tens of billions of dollars toward reducing the interest rate on student loans. This is even getting to the forgiveness question, but reducing the interest rate. Or the United States government can continue to invest tens of billions of dollars in tax loopholes for billionaires and millionaires. Think about it for a minute. There are lobbyists who will protect every one of those tax loopholes, who will be there morning, noon, and night to make sure that the Buffett rule does not go through. Those loopholes stay open and billionaires hang on to every single penny that they can now get through those loopholes. What have we got on the other side on student loans? All we've got is our voices and our votes. That's fundamentally the best place I can describe the inequality debate in America today. Is this country going to be run for the billionaires and millionaires, or are the rest of us going to say enough of this? We want to invest, instead of in billionaires, we want to invest in our students. We're going to take back our country. We're going to make our voices heard. We're going to make our votes heard. That's what this is about.
Ooh, a little bit of fire.
Yeah.
Wow. She was difficulty keeping her composure there.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, this event is actually sponsored, as people can see on the sign there, by a group known in the United States here as the Patriotic Millionaires, and this is a group of more than 100 millionaires and billionaires who are calling for their taxes to be higher. Do you have anything like that in Europe?
Good for you.
In Europe, in France in particular, we usually
even the irony of it being organized. Well, I guess it's kind of like a coalition. It's like, okay, we're quote unquote progressives, or people that think that the rich should pay taxes, just as a kind of a communitarian mindset about it, right? That we should all be in this together, rather than the political warfare aspect of it, where me and Evan fall in the spectrum of it, but. That's even the millionaires and billionaires are putting this thing on. She's, the Buffett rule, like that's, they're like, okay, we're fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
She's out there like 90% New Deal tax rates. They'd be like what? Like, what'd she say? Get off the stage. The big cane would have come out from the side, yanked her off.
Vaudeville playing.
Yeah. The ragtime piano on the corner.
University, but sometimes we don't get that much in exchange either. So it doesn't mean that it's not perfect. I think each country has to invent. Nobody has invented the perfect system of higher education. Because we need to find ways to combine efficiency and equal opportunity, and that's complicated. But I think what Elizabeth just said, to me strikes me as extremely important and a very important move in sort of rethinking access to higher education in this country. I think the level of tuition, and if you look the data we have on the average income of parents of Harvard undergrads, it's getting a little frightening. And I think also transparency in admission procedure is maybe even more difficult to make progress on that kind of issue, but I think to me, viewed from Europe, this is getting a bit extreme. The inequality in access to higher education in this country. That's not saying that in Europe we've solved this problem, because sometimes equal access has been solved at the expense of lower efficiency in the university system. So I'm not sure this is necessarily the right answer, and it's we all have to learn from each other's experience and get moving in this direction.
We also got a number of questions on the role of free trade in inequality, and also the role of organized labor and the decimation of organized labor. You don't write much about labor or organized labor in your book, and I was wondering what your take on labor's role in inequality, and also are these free trade agreements, have they been exacerbating inequality by allowing capital a freer flow?
Yeah, I think they have. I think it's clear that globalization has put low skill and medium skill groups under high pressures. In rich countries. That's for sure. Now, in the book, I probably don't talk enough about labor unions, but I guess one of the reasons why the unions are not playing the role today that they used to is, of course, the change in the structure of employment, and the decline of manufacturing employment, the rise of services and production in smaller units and different kinds of work, has made
that was done by free trade.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't the rise of services, is that when you destroy a huge part of your workforce's livelihood, they're going to try to find some way to survive. Mm-hmm. And if they can't get actual productive work or things that are of high capital intensity, high value creation, like creating steel for bridges or maglev trains or something that we try to represent.
Concrete for power plants, nuclear power plants.
Yeah, then they're going to go have some kind of service job, which is generating very little or none or even negative with the MIC jobs, economic value. So, once again, they like the service economy because it's a low-wage economy, so they can shove more symbolic bills of, money into their coffers, which mean less and less. As the looting becomes more exacerbated, the currency is worth less, but they're getting more of it, so that's all they care about.
Less strong to address the problem of the present. And it's actually interesting to see that a number of European countries which used not to have national minimum wages, in the past, have been actually introducing national minimum wages, in Britain, in Germany. So, these are two important European countries where unions used to do the job somehow until 10 or 20 years ago, and there was no national minimum wage because we thought that unions were the right place to negotiate wages in the different industry. And these two countries...
As if it's all just some kind of administrative decision. Like, the society agreed that unions were the best way to do it now, but now we're saying the minimum wage should be good, right? No, this is a fight.
Yeah.
There's interests on other sides, and you engage in a political brawl to get that or not. So, this just feckless, limp-wristed
anti-historical
way of dealing with things,
with governments of different political persuasions have been introducing national minimum wages because, this can be a way to conduct a wage policy that's more suitable to today's world. So, that's not enough, but, we need to think about this in light of these evolutions.
I would add something more about unions. In America, unions help build America's great middle class. They did. And they did that two ways. They did it by getting out and getting workers organized so that there were better working conditions, better pay. Those things worked, and every one of the benefits that unions negotiated for ultimately worked out for everyone else. They ended up raising wages for union and non-union workers. They ended up getting health benefits for union and non-union workers. But here's the key. The second thing that unions did is they were out there as a force to be able to argue for things that were in the interests of working people generally. So unions were on the front line in Social Security. Unions were on the front line in the fight for Medicare. Unions were on the front line in many of the fights for civil rights. Unions are out there to try to argue for what benefits the middle of America, what benefits working people in America. And I think it's no accident that a big part of what happened with trade policy was that it hit in unionized industries and helped take a lot of the legs out from underneath unionized workers in the United States. And that...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when they... Right. As a 1%er, you have this organized labor force who is, demanding a voice at the workplace, respect. They're demanding benefits. They're demanding retirement. They're demanding health care. Because they're able to ask for those things because the value that they create can supply those things. They're not asking for unicorns and like a magic dragon to ride on, or they're not asking for $1 million a day, because those things couldn't be sought out. Right? So they're just in effect, what I'm trying to say here is they're demanding a portion of the value that they create, and a fair portion. And so to counter that, the 1%er, or the corporate manager running the business or whatever, or the position of the finance capitalist behind it, who is saying, I own this and I want this to make me more money. We'll say, hey, we're going to knock down the trade barriers, and now we can ship this whole factory, pack it up, ship it over to Malaysia, and they'll do it for 1/10 the cost. It'll be much shittier because you won't have people that have known how to do this, who have built this technology, who have a voice, and therefore can make a better product because they're actually feeding information up both directions, not just some kind of corporate decree, but there's information coming from the ground level where the work is actually getting done to make a better process, to make a better product. And that all gets shut out where you go have some place where it's done with slave labor conditions. So that's what's being talked about here.
I thought I would play for you an interesting clip of Katrina vanden Heuvel from The Nation magazine and David Brooks talking about intervention in Iraq. And you can see that the establishment is way more on the side of the American people. Well, it's split, but when we had the Syrian chemical weapons false flag event, the establishment was all for it. It was like 80-20 or something like that, or even 90-10 in terms of in favor and who was against it. But with this Iraq potential debacle, it seems way more split in the direction of public opinion. So in 1 year, we've gone from that kind of stark contrast of the elites and the oligarchy being totally for war to realizing, hey, this doesn't work out for us in the long run. It is no longer the way world politics is going to be conducted, and to get embroiled in another Middle Eastern war is just completely self-destructive and not in our even geopolitical imperial best interests. So check it out.
And it must involve Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Perhaps the most promising development is that Saudi Arabia is now willing to tone down sectarian war and possibly even cooperate with Iran on Syria and Iraq. And I think these are efforts we need to make. And I think that, Senate Armed Services Chair Carl Levin was correct, calling for caution. It's unclear, he said, how airstrikes on our part can succeed unless the Iraqi army is willing to fight. And that's certainly uncertain, given the fact that this is now a sectarian, brutal civil war, and that the United States really simply should not be sucked into another round of war in Iraq.
Well, David, let me ask you about one of the points that Katrina raised there, because there has been a lot of second-guessing about whether the U.S. pullout of troops in 2011 was a mistake, whether there should have been a residual force left behind, and whose timetable that was anyway.
Right, well, there's plenty of blame to go around. Obviously, in the Bush invasion in 2003, we basically destroyed the government of Iraq, and that led to a power vacuum. We slowly learned from that, and over the next 8 years began to build a state. And with measurable results, the Iraqi military performing at a much higher level. We had great ambassadors really urging Maliki and creating opportunities for Maliki to act in non-sectarian ways. And there really was, as President Obama said in 2011, he said it was a stable, secure country. And so we weren't there yet, but clear progress is being made on every measurable level. Starting in 2011, we withdraw, and then it all just slides backwards. So you have to blame Bush, you have to blame Obama, you have to blame Maliki. There's plenty of blame to go around. But the fact was that the nation building that did occur around the time of the surge did create a semi-stable state that we'll never know if it would have been completely stable, but it was heading in the right direction.
Is there a cautionary tale here? When we think about Afghanistan, the president has laid out a very specific timetable for withdrawal of forces there and drawn criticism from those who say that is an invitation for disaster, and we're seeing exactly that in Iraq. Katrina first.
No, I don't think so. I disagree with David. The invasion of 2003 just cannot be, and no equivalence can be drawn between that and withdrawal. The invasion was not just a mistake, at best a fool's errand, at worst a criminal act. And I think what we need to ask ourselves is, after the Iraq misadventure, which will eventually cost this nation in excess of $2 trillion, not to mention tens of thousands of lost, maimed, shattered lives, and thousands of Iraqi deaths, how much more is the United States supposed to sacrifice for a government, in the case of Iraq, a country unwilling to go beyond its sectarian differences or unable to? And I think we need to ask these tough questions, because the president, rightly in his foreign policy speech a month ago, spoke well of restraint in terms of U.S. military action. Of course, we need to look forward. And I can come back to the idea of tough diplomacy, tough political work that will be clearer resolution. To pour in arms, listen, a lot of these arms, as David, I think, and some of his allies wanted to do more in Syria, that country's already awash in arms. A lot of those arms have fallen into extremists, militant extremists, not the so-called moderates. So I think we make a mistake in not learning the lessons of unintended consequences as we pour arms into this region.
On a similar note, was also a party that cut across lines. Wow, I'm getting really far ahead of myself. Better.
Don't worry about it.
You gotta follow this more.
Stop it, Matt! God, ruining it again.
Quit touching me there.
No. Wouldn't ever say that.
Good thing for editing, huh?
We should do this live.
That'd be great.
William Henry Harrison. Let's see. Martin Van Buren, the greatest facial hair in presidential history.
Yes.
William Henry Harrison, who died real quick.
I think there's no other way to do this than just read, and that sucks. But then talking about the chunk, right? Just gonna take more patience than we've ever had to exercise.
Look at Polk.
Look at him. Just look at him.
Look at him. He just seems very self-assured.
Mm.
Like Zachary Taylor here, followed by Millard Fillmore.
Old Philly.
You can kind of see the degradation of the presidential office from sort of Monroe to, I guess Adams is the best, but from Adams to Lincoln is pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, guys that are just
Yeah, it's a good podcast. I'm just on the Wikipedia president's page, reading off names.
Like all this reading is, reading this stuff is, Or we should just read headlines too. In headlines today.
Flash across the wire. Jesse Owens.
Sports scores today.
The horse today.
Today the weather was
overcast. Again, important. My brother John was a better swimmer. He was able to bring men from PT 109. I had to leave my prostitute in the car because I swam to safety. He'd go to sleep. They'd maybe talk about it the next day. Ted Kennedy.
Give a press conference next day.
I wish my brother John was here. George H.W. Bush killed him.
Yep, he did.